Hello everybody, Chocolate Guy here. Happy Father's Day everyone, and welcome back to another countdown. I hope you take time out of your day to let your father know, or the person who most closely represents a father figure in your life, how much you care about them. Same with moms as well. Since this video was originally going to be a Mother's Day episode ranking, but I couldn't get it out in time by Mother's Day, so I attached the few Nicktoons Father's Day episodes into the ranking and released it today instead. I'm super fortunate to be home right now with both my parents, who I love and care about a lot. So, when I was looking through Nickelodeon holiday specials, I realized there was a decent number of episodes for Mother's Day, and while there weren't as many for Father's Day, ranking all of them together gives me quite a few episodes to talk about. It does make total sense why there would be a lot of episodes centered around these holidays, as there's a ton of material to get out of exploring characters' relationships with one of their parents, or just the complicated circumstances with a parent, or lack thereof. Even if the episode just has a funny plot centered around a parent or the idea of parenthood, that could give an episode or a show a lot to work with. All this made me excited to sit down and watch all these episodes, and while this roster overall is not that strong, there were some really interesting episodes, and unlike some previous lists, there are some episodes on here that are pretty popular and more well known. So it will be exciting to dive into those and see how my opinion aligns with the general public's. There's also some hidden gems, so to speak, but we'll get there when we get there. Same rules as usual apply, so I'm not going to go over them again. Watch any of my previous Nicktoons rankings lists if you want to know the ins and outs of how these lists operate. The only thing that is new for this video is that I will be including, for the first time, both classic and post-classic Nicktoons episodes for this list, to get a total of 11 that I'll be ranking. No modern episodes though, which I do define as anything after It's Pony. Also, I didn't include Parents' Day episodes because there was only 2 of them, and one of them I have talked about multiple times before, and it also would have easily topped this list, so I didn't want to include it to make this list a little more interesting. And I thought it would have been weird to still throw in the other one from Cat Dog, so I decided to just not include that one either. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's get right into this. Here is my list of every Nicktoons, Mother's, and Father's Day episode ranked. So Back at the Barnyard was a show I watched an amount as a young kid, but I haven't seen any of it in a very long time, outside of some of the memes. So I didn't know what to expect going in, and seeing this episode as in last place, surprise, it's not very good. Look, it's not awful. There are some moments that are kinda funny, and the setup is alright, but man, this is just the most predictable episode ever, and I don't even mean the story. I mean, once you hear the setup, you're able to predict pretty much every joke route the episode takes. It's just really uninspired. Bessie thinks Otis is her long-lost son and embarrasses him, and that's it. You know how every joke is going to go, they do nothing interesting with that setup, and the second it seems like they might, the episode very quickly ends. And when the joke isn't Bessie's embarrassing Otis, the only other joke this episode has is Otis screaming and overreacting, which is just so funny, oh my god. They could have told some interesting jokes out of the setup, but every scene is so played out and predictable, and safe. And the few times it isn't, it's just kinda loud and obnoxious. I don't get the appeal. Maybe if I knew these characters' usual dynamic more, all this would be inherently more awkward in a funny way, but for where I'm sitting, this episode is a boring waste of a decent concept and doesn't make the show look very unique or appealing, so I don't really have any interest in coming back to the show, and on top of that, I just don't get much out of any of it, making it a bad one overall, and the worst on this list. So Mighty Bee is another show I watched an amount of when I was a very young kid, but I haven't seen any of it in years and remember so little about it. And for a show from that era where Flash and CG was all the rage, I will say I really like the art direction in the series. It reminds me a lot of old-timey cartoons, and even beyond that, it kind of reminds me of Ren and Stimpy's art style without all the craziness and gross out. And this nice element really stinks when watching this episode because this episode is pretty bad. I was a little interested in seeing Happy find his mom because the story is sympathetic and they do a good job making it so, and I thought the montage of them looking through dogs was fun. While it's obvious the imposter dog is up to no good, it's not obvious exactly what they're up to immediately and that they're not Happy's mom right away, which was actually cool, even if it does become obvious pretty quickly. Despite the positives I mentioned, the story is still really weak. A lot of what it amounts to, outside of the fun montage, is them just looking for dogs, and then Happy and his fake mom getting into trouble, and that part especially is written really poorly. Like, why does Bessie care Happy is playing cards and gambling dog bones? It's not like he's actually gambling money. I know it's a stand-in, but I don't know why they wouldn't have used something more meaningful or just used actual money. I don't know if they just couldn't get away with that, but it just makes the entire scene really dumb. And for someone who seems to care a lot about Happy, it's weird she immediately blames him and gets mad at him and doesn't call out his fake mom at all for also being at this card game. Or put together, maybe she's not a good influence on him. That could have actually been an interesting conflict. Having to deal with the fact, despite Happy being excited to have his mom around, the other people around him who have actually raised him and have a prior connection with him struggle with the fact she's a horrible influence on Happy. Instead, they just hang out, do one or two semi-bad things, and then the second his fake mom wants to pull a big heist, unsurprisingly, Happy turns her in. The episode never really does anything to make me ever believe that's not what Happy was gonna do. He never seems excited by the idea of committing this heist, and immediately seems put off by it, so all this stuff near the end just feels pointless. And the ending message is fine, but very simple. My other, honestly bigger problem with this episode is that it's just not very funny. Most of the jokes just go in one ear and out the other, and there are bits that should be funny, like I think they're written well on paper, but the pacing and timing of them is all wrong. And I think Bessie's voice is supposed to be really obnoxious and annoying in a funny way, but it's just kind of annoying, and some of the jokes rely on you finding that delivery funny, which I just didn't. And that might be more of a personal preference thing, but it really does this episode no favors as far as where I'm sitting. It's cool that they got Amy Poehler to do her voice, but the voice itself doesn't work for me. So yeah, despite the episode's positives, it's overall a mess that doesn't really use the Mother's Day holiday well and doesn't make me interested in watching more of the show anytime soon. So this episode is okay. After really liking the Valentine's Day episode, I was excited to watch this one for this list, and I was pretty underwhelmed. Look, what drew me to the show when I watched it the last time was that it had a fun, simple concept that just focused on gags like you would see in a 90s Nicktoon. A girl and her dumb pony get in wacky adventures is a simple idea that I couldn't really see them making a show about now, but I could see it fitting in with 90s Nicktoons, which makes it cool that the show did come out in the 2020s. The problem is I'm just not always interested in watching shows like this as an adult, and am currently just a lot more interested in narrative animated series, unless your show can do something really interesting with the comedy or some other aspect, and this episode very much does not. Look, there were some really funny moments. This show just has a great slapstick and dry sense of humor it balances well. But a lot more of the jokes this time around were hit or miss, and the plot and message is super weak. It's super cute and noble seeing Anne want to get a great present for her mom, and it's kind of cute how much Pony admires and builds up Anne for a really silly reason, and how she does the same thing for him at the end. But the actual story itself is so simple and predictable, and the message is also just very basic and a pretty uninteresting one. In order for something to truly be great or innovative, you need to spice things up or do something creative and different. Like, that's cool and a nice message for kids, I suppose, but did anyone actually need an episode centered around that idea? The episode is also just kinda slow and repetitive in some places, and all this would be whatever if the jokes were really good, but an amount of them aren't. I still think this episode is funny enough and nice enough in its message, with some good scenes involving some of the relationship stuff I mentioned earlier, for it to still be an okay and I guess overall enjoyable episode and Mother's Day special, but yeah, it's just nothing really that special when everything is said and done. Hey look, the first Father's Day episode on this list. And the worst one. Though it's not bad by any means. So I feel pretty similar to this episode as I do for the last one of It's Pony. This episode doesn't do a whole lot for me, and the story and message is kind of weak. But what this one has over the last episode is that I like Jimmy Neutron more as a show overall, which I know I try not to let affect my opinions on any episodes, but this does lead me to being more charmed by character interactions, and the reason why I prefer this show is even in middle-of-the-road episodes like this, the joke writing in this episode is an amount better and more consistent. This plot is super generic, and you know exactly where every part of it is going to go, and I honestly don't think they get the most out of this plot even beyond that, with Hugh being such a funny character and seeing the stereotypical 50s cool guy archetype with the Frank Sinatra New York accent voice, and how hilarious that idea could be, but they just don't get that much out of it, which really sucks and feels like a waste, especially for the Father's Day episode of the show, where they could have had either a really interesting or funny episode involving Jimmy and his cool new dad. But despite this, the episode is really likable, and the characters are all just super funny and charming, leading to me caring a bit more about the story than I should under the circumstances. And there are still an amount of funny moments and jokes, and they occasionally get a funny gag or cool scene out of this concept. So yeah, while this is an incredibly middle-of-the-road and average Jimmy Neutron and Father's Day episode, I don't really have that much disdain for it. It's just weaker than the episodes above it. So I've been wanting to talk about ChalkZone again for a while, since I do find the show's concept really interesting, but haven't loved most of the episodes I've watched for these lists, and that's really all I've seen from the show so far. And while I wasn't the biggest fan of this episode either, and I would even say I prefer the Halloween one over this one as well, overall, this was a fun, short cartoon with a great premise centered around a gift that will give you anything you want, but those things can have unintended consequences and are also made of chalk, which leads to its own set of funny circumstances. We get some fun scenes out of this, and some interesting turns for this episode to take as Rudy deals with two problems born out of this gift. There's also some pretty funny jokes, and ones that I wasn't expecting. I did not expect a Nicktoons episode to mention a birthday suit. That really caught me off guard, but was also super hilarious. This episode doesn't get that much out of its premise, or is much of a Father's Day episode either, as it's just a random thing to make part of the story make sense, and this episode isn't the most interesting or engaging, and overall does end up as slightly above average when everything's said and done, just as a fun little short cartoon, but I did enjoy more here than I didn't. And I think the fun and creative world, along with there being some good jokes and some good writing in places, really does do this episode a lot of favors. And because of its positives, I did enjoy this one more than the episodes I put below it. It's just not quite good enough to be in the top half of this list. Okay, I know I probably shouldn't drop this hot of a take on one of these lists, but just hear me out. This episode is fine. The last scene is great and super meaningful, and I get that, but the rest of the episode is just your standard Rugrats affair. And honestly, that might be overselling how good it is. Look, this episode does use Mother's Day as a holiday pretty well. We get some interesting scenes of the babies describing how they view and the experiences they have had with their moms, and we get some cool and even unexpected stuff out of this that I wouldn't have expected to see in Rugrats. And I also like some of the adult stuff, especially with Dee Dee and her mom showing their relationship. This episode does just get a lot of great stuff out of the Mother's Day holiday. It really goes all in on the episode being centered on that day, for the most part. I also do think it was a cool decision to make someone as young as Chucky, who never even got to know his mom existed, isn't actually bothered by the absence of not having his mom around, because all he knows is his dad, and his dad's pretty cool. The only time Chucky really seems bothered by not having a mom is when the other babies bring so much attention to it and act like it's such an important thing. I think this was a bold choice of the show, much less them actually just tackling the dynamic where a parent isn't around because they passed away and how it affects the rest of the family was also very ambitious for an animated kids show to tackle at the time. Here's the problem though. Other than the last scene and a brief scene at the beginning introducing Chaz's struggle to be open with Chucky about what happened to his mom and how he is feeling about all this, the rest of the episode actually doesn't get much out of this or have much to say about it. While I think it was a cool choice to make Chucky the way he is here, it simultaneously makes it so there isn't actually much to explore with him, so the rest of the episode slowly follows the babies as they try to find Chucky a mom in normal Rugrats fashion, which is boring and repetitive. And this is most of the episode. Very simple jokes that do nothing for me, some whatever gross out humor, and a slow and dull story. The conclusion Chucky comes to that he appreciates his dad and that his dad fills the role other babies' moms do for them just fine is a sweet and great message. But it's just a cute moment and not really anything the episode was actually building towards in any meaningful way, because Chucky has essentially always had this opinion from how content he was earlier in the episode. Like, I understand kids maybe not grasping that, but as an adult, I can clearly see from how he responds to some of the baby's comments earlier that he is completely satisfied with his dad and he doesn't really need a mom. This episode also doesn't really focus on any of the other interesting adult stuff either. It's a very minor part of the episode, and instead we spend more time on this story, which once again is not great. So this is sadly most of what the episode consists of. And look, I know the final scene is iconic and powerful, and I do like it a lot. I like how much of a whiplash it is from everything else in the episode, and I love the message that a parent who passed away can still have a positive impact on their children, even if they don't really remember them at all, just through things and writing they left behind, and how meaningful that stuff can be. I think that's really powerful, especially for kids in that situation, that you don't have to be sad, and the memory or idea of that parent can be a really powerful and important thing to hold on and keep with you. This was just such an ambitious thing for a kid show to tackle at the time, and I cannot stress that enough. But I still just wish the rest of the episode would have gone further with this idea and others around Chucky's mom being gone. There's so much interesting stuff you could have tackled to make this one not feel like a pretty mediocre episode with one really good scene at the end, which is sadly what it is. The scene does bring the episode up quite a lot, but I can still only rate this one like on the higher end of okay. Either way, this is the most iconic and well-known Mother's Day episode that Nickelodeon has ever put out, and for that reason, if you haven't seen it somehow, I would recommend it for the ending scene alone, at the very least to see it once. But the episodes above it are just overall better packages. Okay, before I even get into what I want to say about this episode, for some reason, this episode is not on Paramount Plus, despite the rest of the show being on there. And I honestly don't know why it isn't. If anyone has an answer in the comments, please tell me, because I tried to figure this out, and I really couldn't find anything. Either way though, the place I was able to get footage for this episode looks like trash. So this segment is going to be a little less edited than the others in this video, but the actual review will go on as normal. Anyways, this was one I was kinda conflicted on, because after how much I've liked all the Wild Thornberries episodes I've talked about in previous lists, I found a decent chunk of this episode really boring. Eliza and Debbie both competing to get their mom the best Mother's Day gift seems like a fun concept for a plot, but they don't actually do that much interesting with it. They also don't do much interesting stuff with the location, and the story as a whole feels really cliche and generic. Like, of course their mom would rather spend time with them than get a great gift. Of course that's going to be the message of the episode, and their gift is going to be something that allows them to spend time with her. That's what the episode is clearly building to. There are some cute and funny moments, especially between Nigel and Marianne, and I like some of the competition stuff between the girls, but for the most part, this episode is dull. Or at least a little over half of it is, because the rest of it is great. Once they get to the mountainside with the gemstones, the episode fully utilizes its concept and location in this mountainside. It's fun seeing these two work together in dangerous circumstances to get their mom a gift they both think she'll really like, but they're still siblings who are technically still competing. So they have a hard time trusting each other, which leads to some fun and even tense outcomes as they traverse different obstacles. The character writing in the show is great, and this final conflict makes great use of it. And it's super fun to see how awesome Marianne is, and how she helps both her daughters get to safety when shit goes bad. It's such a great showcase of everything that makes her character great, and why she is a fantastic mom in this Mother's Day special. It really takes full use of this episode being set on that day. I just really enjoyed everything about this part of the episode, and thought this whole final sequence was really tense and exciting, and a great way to conclude this one. Also, even if I find the twist about what Marianne really wants for Mother's Day predictable, I do find the final scene really charming, and a great representation of what Mother's Day is. So yeah, there's a lot that just doesn't work here, but there's also a lot that does, and when everything's said and done, I think the good stuff does win out. and this is a decent episode overall. If only barely, since there is a pretty decent chunk of this episode I could really do without. And it was close to being just okay. But still, I did really enjoy this one. So here we have another very interesting episode of As Told by Ginger. I'm not really sure what most people's opinions on this one are. I'm pretty sure some people feel pretty negatively towards it, and while it's got some problems, I actually overall like this one, and think there's some really interesting elements. I think what turns people away from this episode is Ginger's behavior. She comes off as really rude and more like an annoying teen than usual. Not caring about spending time with her mom, but then gets super jealous when her mom spends time with Courtney, who is clearly going through a lot. Some may find this out of character, but I actually don't think it is, and I think it actually makes a lot of sense and is very interesting. Most teens, even if they have a good relationship with their parents, at some point kind of feel like they're too good or cool for them, until it feels like they can't hang out with them for some reason. Then they get kind of desperate to and kind of clingy. This is a pretty relatable experience for most teens going through puberty, even kids who are more down to earth and usually pretty reasonable like Ginger. This idea and dynamic with Ginger feeling this way about her mom is also pretty interesting, and I like how the episode incorporates Courtney into this. I know I've praised Courtney in the past, but man, especially here, she is such a great character. It's so fascinating to see how much of kind of a drama queen she can be, but at the same time, in fairness, she is a young girl just worried about her mom. And it is interesting to see how deeply this affects her, but also how much of a liking she takes to Lois, and also how resilient and handy she is, and kind of serves as this weird, perfect daughter who wants to spend all this time with Lois, making Ginger's complex feelings even more interesting. Every scene with her is golden and a lot of fun for this reason, because she is such a dynamic character, and they also get some funny moments out of this contrast with her. While Carl's plot isn't anything fantastic, it is pretty decent, because while the concept is kinda dumb and bland, it does have some funny moments, and Dr. Dave's plan is clever, and I like how this endears him to Lois more. I think the reason this episode just isn't anything that great, and what would hold it back from being one of the best of season 2, is that the episode's actual story doesn't get much out of exploring Ginger's feelings or exploring Courtney's experience as well, and why being so tight with Mrs. Foutley is this meaningful and important thing for her. A lot of this episode is just Ginger getting annoyed and the girls occasionally butting heads, and we don't get a lot more interesting scenes and discussion of any of this than going much further than that. When we do get into our characters' heads and get to dissect them a little more, it's great. This episode does tackle some really interesting stuff, especially with the ending. I know some people think what Ginger does in this episode is awful, and you know what? It is. But it is very true to life for a teen to feel someone is invading on their home life or personal space, even if that fear is irrational and leads to her not being super kind towards another person who doesn't deserve it. And I do disagree with that, but I can't deny it's in character and a fascinating look at teenage angst and some pretty interesting dynamics. And I really like the ending where both girls level with each other, and you get to see they both have things that are a little beyond the other girl's understanding, and one day they hopefully will understand each other, but for now it just works well for Courtney to leave and them to be apart for a little bit, and they appreciate and understand that at the very least. And we really get to see how Courtney's mother isn't really there for her, but Courtney loves her and tries to make an effort to get notice and affection, which is so sad, but really compelling, especially with Ginger's reaction that she feels bad for pushing Courtney away from her mom, even if she can't help the way she feels, but more uses this to learn to appreciate how her mom is there for her. All this is so interesting, and I wish the rest of the episode explored this more, and a lot of it wasn't just concentrated into this one scene. So yeah, when everything is said and done, this is a decent episode with some really strong elements, but a good Mother's Day episode that explores the complexity of teens' relationships with their mothers in different circumstances and kind of compares the two a little bit, which is so compelling. Just not done well enough to be any higher on this list. So this is the second episode of Harvey Beaks I've seen all the way through, and I feel pretty similarly to the Valentine's Day one, in that it's a decent episode that could be stronger. I like the premise of this episode a lot, exploring this father-daughter dynamic with these two eccentric characters. And while Princess is annoying, she is intentionally so, and her want for a mom is compelling, especially when she pushes or butts heads with her dad, who just has no interest in dating anyone. This leads to some really good gags in the first half involving this, especially with this matchmaker thing Harvey runs. I also really like the back end, showcasing Princess's dad's relationship with this mom for hire, and I like how they actually have a lot of chemistry, but he still struggles to get with her, even though Princess is so desperate, because he's just not ready for any of that. This is a very true-to-life experience the show demonstrates in a fun and compelling way for kids to understand, and I really enjoyed and appreciated it for this reason. And I like the ending message that Princess doesn't need to have someone date or be married to her dad for her to have a mother figure in her life, and accepts her dad will be ready to date when he is, and just learns to appreciate how much he cares for her as it stands. But also, the episode shows that her biological mom will always be a part of her and learns to accept that as well. Most episodes would have just done that last bit in maybe a kind of forced way, but I like how the idea might be easier for her to accept because all the other parts of that message are present. What holds this episode back for me is that the episode is really slow in places, and not all the jokes work, and there are points that they definitely could have expanded on some of these dynamics. And while I think it's a unique twist to have Princess be able to spiritually connect with her deceased mother, I kinda think this scene is unnecessary, and all these great ending messages would have been stronger if this woman would have comforted Princess in a more traditional way than just happening to understand a convenient way for Princess to reach her dead mom. I do think the whole ending is cute, and the message still works, and there's even some funny and unexpected moments. But this ending would have been much stronger and more compelling if it was written in a different way. But this is still a really lovely Mother's Day episode with so many cute and funny moments that does just use its concept so well to just show off such wonderful relationships in a really awesome way. That, for all those reasons, it did make me really like this episode a lot, so it landed pretty high above competition. But there were two episodes that were pretty clearly better. So this is one I've been really excited to talk about for a while now. El Tigre is kind of a cult Nicktoon classic that only ran for a season and was kind of hard to watch for a while, but now is available on Paramount+. This is the first episode of the show I've seen, and I gotta say, it was really good, and is easily the best Father's Day episode on this list. This show has such a good concept of El Tigre's dad being a hero and his grandpa being a villain, and what role he serves being kind of in a gray area. And while this episode doesn't get the most out of this concept, the characters and world of the show are so fun, and this episode has a good enough story that it really doesn't matter. This show is a great mix of being a fun, semi-action show and having great, wacky, over-the-top jokes that are actually really funny. This episode is hilarious, and once again, the story of this episode is really good, and uses the episode being set on Father's Day and just the show's world in general really well. Having El Tigre team up with the son of a villain to hatch up this weird scheme to give both their fathers a great Father's Day gift is just a ton of fun. And while where the story goes is all decently predictable, every scene gets the most out of this concept. And once again, there's just so many great jokes throughout. And I love the way this episode goes about certain twists, even predictable ones, to make them feel a bit more interesting and exciting. I especially love the ending where El Tigre uses the fighting style his dad created to make him happy and redeem himself after this whole scheme is revealed and the villain's son betrays El Tigre. And he uses this technique to beat the bad guys after making fun of it earlier in the episode in a really natural way. And I actually didn't see it coming back in such a rewarding way, but it really does work. And through all of this, you get to see and explore a little bit of Manny's interesting relationship with his dad and how unique it is in the backdrop of this weird world. I really enjoy this episode a lot, and it made me want to watch more of this show. Well, this episode definitely could be more surprising in places and do a little more with certain scenes, along with exploring its interesting character dynamics like the ones I mentioned further. This was pretty stellar and hilarious, and just a great Father's Day episode I would highly recommend. But it was just slightly beat out for the number one spot on this list. Shocker, the Hey Arnold episode is number one. And it's a season 3 episode to boot. And come on, there's a very small amount of episodes from that season that weren't great. Most are fantastic, and this is one of them. While not anywhere near my favorite of that season, because man, season 3 is just packed to the brim with some of the most amazing episodes. It is still just such a strong and complex one that tackles with such a difficult topic. I don't think I'm gonna say a crazy ton about it here, as I do want to do an individual episode review of this episode at some point, as it very much deserves the time to fully dissect everything. But what I will say is this is such a good Mother's Day episode, and the best one Nickelodeon has and most likely ever will put out, because it masterfully showcases Helga and Miriam's complicated relationship, and how Miriam does deeply care about Helga and wants to be there for her, but is just such a mess and continually messes up and fails her. And while Helga can be a jerk, Helga is right in her criticisms of Miriam, and it's really sad the detailed level Helga understands the problem Miriam has, and how she just fails her fundamental duties as a mom a lot of the time. And the more Miriam messes up on this road trip, the more Helga pulls away herself. The episode really explores all of this and how these characters feel about this situation and relationship in such a detailed and interesting way through so many good scenes on this road trip, showing how much disdain but also disappointment Helga has in Miriam, and also demonstrates how she has kind of had to mature past her age on her own to understand why her parents, but more specifically her mom, has failed her and how she can compensate for that. But we also get to see how Miriam really does love her daughter and wants to reach out to her and have a relationship with her, but really doesn't know how and continues to make the situation worse at every turn. And I really do love the ending. It is a little simple for how complex this episode can be, but I do think the message of it, that most parents are trying, and even if you think you have them pegged and understand why they may not always be coming through for you, people are complicated. And parents aren't these very black and white caretakers, and there's a lot more to them that you may not know. And if they're trying, they will come through at some point. It's simultaneously a very hopeful message, but also a decently realistic one in a lot of situations. And this episode, what I really love about it, doesn't try to make Miriam seem like this great mom now, or make it seem like this relationship is fixed, but just shows she came through this one time, and Helga is appreciative of that. And hopefully this can be the start of them reconnecting a bit, which is really sweet and powerful. And this all also shows to parents that even if you've made mistakes, it's not too late to try to reconnect with your kids, especially if they're young, if you do care about them and you are trying. This episode is just so good, and such an impactful and wonderful Mother's Day episode that I don't really have any issues with. And I just gotta say once again, the fact that this wouldn't even be in my top 10 of Hey Arnold Season 3 really just proves how fantastic of a season that season is. But with all that said, for all these reasons and so much more, this easily took the #1 spot on this list. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more videos similar to this in the future. Also, leave me a comment telling me what you thought of my list and any opinions on episodes you've seen from it. I hope you're having a great Father's Day and had a great Mother's Day back in May. The next Nicktoons holiday lists will be for the post-classic Halloween episodes, which I'm excited to make. In the meantime, I should have other different lists and reviews coming soon. Thank you all again for watching, and until next time, this has been Chocolate Guy, signing off.